What is up, fellow RC addicts, enthusiasts, and just everyone else interested in the hobby? Today we're going to do the last of the body reinforcements. We're going to be using the Max. We're going to be putting the mesh tape on with the shoe goo. I figured this would probably be the best truck to do the final test with, since we have the X-Maxx with the T-Rex tape, the Rustler 4x4 with the Gorilla tape, and then we'll be using the Max with the mesh tape. And they're basically all three identical bodies, just all three different size vehicles. So since they're all the same shape and they all get used for relatively the same purposes, I figured we might as well just do those for a combination. So to get started, obviously we just need to take apart all the braces. Before we get anywhere else, we're gonna go ahead and shoot this in a time lapse, thanks to friend of the channel and subscriber of the channel, Nick. He suggested this. We're gonna go ahead and try the time lapse with this one. Kind of a long process, but hopefully we can get through it and you guys don't get too bored. We'll go ahead. I always like to try to keep the screws together as best as possible, so we'll just go line everything back up. It's just kind of an easy way I like to do things, to kind of remember where things go. Everyone's got their own system. Whatever works best for you, go ahead and do that. I'm gonna go ahead and wash this down, scrub it nice and good, degrease it, and I will be back with you as soon as we get that finished. All right, and we are back. We've got the body nice and clean. We've got it degreased. So I'll put this aside for now, and what we are going to need is a nice high quality mesh drywall tape, fiber tape. You don't want to go cheap here, because it's going to make your life miserable in the end. Decent scissors, hobby knife, and then some hot glue. Show you why in a little bit, but we're not going to need too much of that. And then once we start getting into the actual applying the shoe goo, you want to make sure you got a nice set of nitrile gloves. And then I'm guessing the X-Maxx, or the Max is going to take about 2.5 to 3 bottles of shoe goo. We'll see. But we are going to go ahead and move the operation upstairs when we start applying the shoe goo, because unless you have like the ventilation of somebody who has a paint shop or something, I highly recommend you do it outside, because it's put out some fairly strong fumes. I'd say you might lose some brain cells if you keep it somewhere without some good ventilation. We'll go ahead and just start putting the tape on. First thing I'm going to start with is, when you're applying the tape, you don't have to do it all in one giant laid out piece. You don't have to start out with one long piece. You can kind of just take your time and do little pieces and get little sections done if you want. You want the seams to basically butt up. You don't want them to actually be overlapping. I mean, if you get a little bit of overlap, that's okay. It's just not going to be as perfect as you'd want it, but who cares? It's your car, right? I kind of like to just start in the middle. This is definitely the slowest of the 3 processes I've showed you guys so far. I'd like to think it's the most durable too, but I guess we'll find out. It's definitely probably the longest shooting we'll be doing for the least amount of actual screen time. So we don't want them to overlap, but we want them to get right there next to each other. So it doesn't seem like I actually really need it too much right now, but I'm going to go ahead and kind of show you an example of where you would use the hot glue gun. You can see up in here the little crevice in there. The tape was able to stay in there, but if you just kind of not putting any big globs up, just kind of put a little bit in there, it'll hold it nice and tight into that little spot. And do the same in this little spot here. We're not globbing it up, but it's holding it down in there. You have to make sure you're not actually holding the hot glue gun obviously where it's at, or the hot glue gun won't set and hold it into the crevice. But if you're having trouble, or if you get a cheaper glue, a cheaper tape, you're going to end up having to use a lot of hot glue. I mean, if you don't want to take the time and get this detailed with it, by all means, you don't have to. Make sure you're getting in all these nooks and crannies like that. Now, this is one of those parts where we have to make sure we get this extremely tight, because the bed guard sits down in here. I don't want to have to modify that to fit in, so I'll make sure we get this as tight as possible. So we have to take a little bit extra time in here. If anyone's wondering what I'm using, it's just the MIP drivers, the rubber tip on it. I find it kind of nice for pushing into different corners. And you want to cut that off, save it for maybe somewhere else. Just make sure you either leave it sticky side up or just kind of stick it on the table a little bit. And we are back. So I'm out in the garage because like I said before, this shoe goo is no joke. So unless you have enough ventilation to be doing some painting in your shop area, eventually I hope to actually have that kind of air filtration, so I'll be able to do painting down there and do this, but for right now I can't. So the lighting's not so good, so I don't know, maybe kind of bodies, tapes on there pretty well. Seams aren't overlapping. Not perfect by any means, but took my time, and just the most important part is just making sure you're taking your time. If you're gonna do it, might as well do it right. We're in a well-ventilated area out in the garage. I'm gonna go ahead and grab a pair of nitrile gloves, half bottle of shoe goo from another body I did, but I know I'm gonna need at least that plus another tube, so I might as well open that up. And again, excuse the poor lighting. I'm not in my hobby area, so the lighting is kind of poor. So one thing I like to have is something in case it does lift up on you, the mesh tape, like a little wooden dowel that you don't mind if it gets the shoe goo on there, because once it's on there, it's pretty much stuck on there. So you don't want to get it on, you know, say one of your hobby knives or something like that, because then that'd be screwed. I mean, everyone, like I said, I'm never going to claim to be an expert, and everyone has their own technique of doing it, and starting from one side of the body, working to the other, you know, working in the flats and then working the shoe goo into the joints. I do like to just start at one side of the body and kind of work my way to the other side, but I actually like to kind of start with the corners and the harder spots first, that are harder to get into. And then anybody out there that's done construction or worked with caulk or anything like that, even drywall mud or painting, you don't want to put too thick of a layer on this stuff. And if you put too much out there at one time, it's going to start to get really sticky and tacky on you. It's going to get very difficult to work with. So I find it easier, unless you have a big flat area to work with, to just put a little bit at a time. So I mean, yeah, I could empty out a whole tube right now and do this whole area, but I kind of just a little bit at a time. Oh, I think I forgot to point out that I put the painter's tape all the way around the edge, just to kind of protect the body, since this was a pre-painted body, and either way I wouldn't want the shoe goo on the outside. And then I also went ahead and covered any of the holes for any of the body mounts or body supports and all that stuff. So sorry for not showing that. I'll do it once we're done with this, but for now I think we're just gonna go into that time-lapse mode for Nick. Hope you guys enjoy. Also tears through a lot, so I have the 3mm gloves right now, so I'd recommend probably getting like 5mm gloves. But you see, if I start playing with that a little bit too much, it starts to drag around and it gets a little goopy. So like, that's why you want to work with the smaller sections, so you have plenty of time to adjust everything you want to. So we'll probably go over this with the second try, just because I can't really see too well with the lighting out here. I just want to, it'll be a very thin layer next time, just to make sure I'm getting everything, like when you're painting your walls in your house. See, I'm starting to not listen to myself and starting to play with stuff for longer than I should. I should just do one little thin layer and then come back and do a second layer. So then sometimes if you're not able to get your finger in this corner, you're kind of, these tight little areas, you're kind of worried about moving the tape around. You can get a little bit in there and get one of these cheap brushes. I wouldn't use it on the whole thing just because of how thick the shoe goo itself actually is. There's even times I found too where it's starting to get so sticky you're moving it that you just kind of need to let it take a little break and let it, you know, set up before you start moving around. Otherwise it starts getting really sticky and tacky, and it turns into a big pain in the butt to work with. basically all there is to the shoe goo, mesh tape and shoe goo. Obviously you can put a little bit more on if you want. Everyone's going to have their own methods. Everyone's going to find different ways, and different things are going to be easier for different people, but we'll go ahead and let this dry overnight. I'll get everything put back together. Alright, and we are back with the Max body. Everything is dried up nicely. Told you I forgot to show you the cover, so I just put little pieces of tape over, cover the holes up. So now it's just basically like unwrapping a present, getting all the painter's tape off, cutting any of the extra holes out that we need, and then just putting all the bracing back on, and good to go and bash. Alright, next thing to do is trim the body. I find it helpful with this stuff when you're trying to trim it to kind of hold it tight. And just the way this stuff's made out of, it's like trying to cut rubber without having any kind of enforcement or structure behind it. It's just a pain in the butt. Doesn't need to be perfect. All that little extra stuff will end up getting worn down. We just want to get the big pieces off here, but all right, so we have the body all nice and trimmed up, all the holes cleared out. Only thing left to do is assemble, and then go ahead and bash. If anybody wants a link for the MIP drivers that I'm using, there'll be a link in the description below. Alright folks, there you go. We have the Max with the mesh tape and the shoe goo. We have the X-Maxx with the T-Rex tape, and then we have the Rustler 4x4 with the Gorilla tape. Next thing to do is just bash all of them and see which one holds up best. If you enjoyed the video and think it was helpful at all, please hit the like button. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and hit that button as well. And if you don't do either, at least go out and try to have some fun with some RC, folks. Bear down out.